slight right turn onto North Market Street.
I'm just a bit above the tip of the northern panhandle of West Virginia. And I'm making my way into East Palestine, Ohio. You might have heard of East Palestine. Back in February this year, February 2023, there was a train derailment that happened, and it put out all kinds of toxic chemicals.
So when the train derailed, it caught on fire, releasing a bunch of chemicals that spill into the ground, and then the fumes to go into the air.
I was over at my brother's house when it all went down, and we watched the flames, and the flames are so high it was unbelievable when it was all going down, and we heard it all go, crash and everything.
Now I don't have clean water. Now I don't know if I need to move. I don't know if my home is safe. My town does not feel safe.
Many people in East Palestine, Ohio, and the surrounding communities have been in kind of a limbo. Do I stay or do I go? How much do I believe what I'm hearing from my government and its experts? During my visits, I have met some folks who do seem to trust what they're hearing.
They're always sending newsletters and letting us know what they're doing and how it's becoming and testing all the time. So I think they're letting us know. I mean, it's every day. They're out testing all day, every day. So, I mean, I don't know what else they could do. They're cleaning it up and hauling it out and testing the air quality all over, not just right there. So they're getting readings. From what I heard, it's normal, I guess.
I have to say, though, those voices were in the minority. I talked with quite a few people who still have serious doubts about whether they're being taken care of.
They're not telling us the truth. It's the unknown we're worried about. It's nothing else. I mean, we're scared. A lot of people are scared.
I don't have any confidence in this government we have right now. I do not have any confidence that everything is going to be rectified and okay.
They're trying to do a lot of stuff around here for the town and all that kind of stuff, but I really believe they're not telling the truth about this stuff and what the long term of effects is going to be.
I think people are realizing what we've always known, unfortunately, that in Appalachia, sometimes we just can't trust our elected officials. At the end of the day, we have to rely on ourselves, rely on each other.
In my visits to East Palestine, I've seen the way connections can create strength. People here are tense and afraid, but they also have a resilient pride, right down to pronunciation.
In half a mile, arrive at East Palestine.
Yeah, even my GPS says Palestine. I wonder if that drives the people nuts here.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us. I'm Trey Kay. This small Ohio community of just under 5,000 was briefly at the center of the country's attention 7 months ago. That's when a Norfolk Southern train derailed, spilling toxic vinyl chloride. To avoid an explosion, officials strategically performed an open burn, which sent those chemicals into the air and water. Sulphur Run is a creek that runs next to homes and through the town. Since February, people from a number of government agencies have been on the scene to handle cleanup and community support. Former President Donald Trump visited, I'm told to the delight of residents. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was in town to not nearly as much fanfare. And now, while mitigation work continues, East Palestine is out of the news cycle. I wanted to see and hear what's going on out of the spotlight. How are people in this liminal space? Particularly, how do residents feel about what they're hearing from government agencies about the accident and the cleanup? Whether you're on the left or the right, we live in a country with less trust in our leaders than ever.
I never was suspicious of the government or that the government didn't have my best interest in mind pre-February 3rd. If I was listening to some of the things that I'm saying today, I would think I was a conspiracy theorist. My name is Jamie Wallace. By profession, I'm a human resource director, but right now I am the president of the Unity Council for the East Palestine train derailment. We are a group of community advocates. We kind of see ourselves as an oversight committee to make sure that our air, water, and soil are clean.
Until the derailment, Jamie was an East Palestine resident. She lived just over a mile from the accident site. Now she's moved with her family to East Liverpool, about 30 minutes away. She has a law degree and a background in political science and public administration.
And what my education taught me is that's who you lean on in your time of need. You lean on your politicians, your legislators. That's who protects you, protects your rights. So, pre-February 3rd, I very much believed in my government.
But now, as president of a response group for her community, the Unity Council, she finds herself a de facto spokesperson for a town still in crisis. Here's a clip of her at a community meeting less than 2 weeks after the derailment.
How many of these people are sleeping in houses that because they didn't use their voice and they didn't throw a fit, their kids are laying in there breathing that stuff in or whatever it is? That's right.
I sat down with Jamie at her current place in East Liverpool to hear how she became so displaced from her home, as well as her faith in leadership.
Do you remember the first government communication you had or guidance that you received after the derailment?
Actually, the communication was kind of minimal. Even the night of the derailment, a government official didn't tell me to leave my house. I didn't get a notice over the broadcast system to leave my house. My mom called me and told me that they were evacuating.
Where were you?
I was at my house. So I am technically 1.1 miles from the derailment site. But an interesting fact about that is the first night that we evacuated, the mayor did post something on Facebook. And he said evacuate within 1 mile of the James Street crossing, which is about 0.6 miles closer to town than where they moved the evacuation site to in furthering days out. So it's interesting. I would like to know why they moved that back almost a mile towards PA. It took the 1 mile zone into a more rural area. It also took our high school out of the 1 mile zone. Had they originally left the 1 mile zone where they declared it that night, the high school where they were evacuating people to would have been within that 1 mile radius.
I feel like what you're suggesting is that they said, here's this area that's affected. And in many ways, what they've done is they've kind of drawn the circle so it does not include the center of town, because if you include the center of town, it's going to shut the business down.
And that's exactly what I was alluding to. They evacuated one side of Market Street, which is the main fairway through town, and they drew it flat right there so that the other side of Market Street was not in that 1 mile zone. I live right behind, on the next street over from Market, on the side they did not evacuate. My front door is about 7 steps to that creek. So that is the proximity to Sulphur Run.
And so, in many ways, the derailment, the explosion, all of the spill was a good bit away, or far enough away, but the fact that, especially when they did the open burn, and it basically would have contaminated the creek, and the creek flowed past your house.
Well, actually, contamination, I think the bulk of it happened before the controlled burn as far as the creeks.
Did you have to permanently relocate away from East Palestine?
Yes, I did. But, after the explosion, I very much trusted the EPA. My husband and I were actually kind of bickering a bit because he's like, we're not going home when they lift this evacuation. And I said, what choice do we have? The EPA says it's fine, it's fine. What changed my mind was the Sunday after the derailment. I had to run to the assistance center, which they had in East Palestine, and people kept saying, man, the smell is so much worse between East Palestine and the neighboring town of Negley. And I just kind of, stored that away in my thoughts. As soon as I pull in my driveway, again, sulfur runs right along my driveway, I started coughing. My eyes started burning. My mouth felt like it was on fire. The smell made you nauseated. And immediately, I'm like, the creek is right there. I look over and I see chemicals floating down the creeks. At that point, I lost all trust in the EPA. It's kind of like being in a marriage and your spouse steps out on you. I don't feel like Norfolk Southern owed me anything. They're a corporation. Of course, they're in it for money. But the EPA, those are my people. Those are the people that pledge their allegiance to, American citizens. So the fact that the EPA, lifted this evacuation a couple days later when all these things were still in the stream, it made me lose all trust.
But you just said something a moment ago. You said your husband says we're not going back. Mm-hmm. Is that changed, or are you gone permanently?
We are gone permanently, because what happened was when they lifted the evacuation, I insisted on having someone from the railroad come down and personally look at my house. He did, and he said, I see why you're worried. So I will send down the lead toxicologist from CTEH, which is the railroad's contractor. At first, he was saying, everything's fine, you can go home if you've had your air testing. And I said, wait, there's this little bit of water, moisture, that goes down my wall in my basement. Can you take a look at it? What he said at the time, the words meant absolutely nothing to me. Now, they mean everything. He said, this is a potential pathway to exposure.
The next day, Jamie says Norfolk Southern called her and offered her rent money. Said they'd help her leave her house and help with moving expenses. She wanted some time to think. She says that night was the first big town hall meeting, and the sense at this meeting was an all clear, and everyone could move back in. She felt like she needed to let her neighbors know what she'd learned. Here's a phone recording from that community meeting.
When they came down to do my air quality test and said it was okay for me to go home, they were going to quit paying my hotel bill, I threw a fit. I said, I want to know what's in that water. And they were sent to my house by the railroad because I ran my mouth, because I spoke up. If all of you don't speak up for yourselves, no one else is going to. So on that night, I had told the whole community that there was a potential pathway to exposure in my basement. Now, what the EPA is saying is we cannot find a pathway to exposure to link the illnesses in the community to the chemicals from the derailment.
Jamie says she's been ridiculed by leadership. She feels like her concerns have been swept under the rug. This is a woman who says she had big faith in government. Until this.
Part of the problem is that a lot of our legislators are relying on what the EPA is saying and on these agencies to report to them. What I've found is we're supposed to be a government for the people, by the people, but by the time what happens with the people gets to the federal level, it's all politics.
You have basically relocated away from East Palestine, and you have no plans to return?
I don't know at this point. That's the problem, is 6 months later, we still don't have enough information to make informed decisions. When people ask, how many of you want to get out of East Palestine? None of us. We chose that place as a home for a reason. Nobody wants to leave. But if the data shows that we need to go, then we need to go. If people choose to stay, maybe the fact of the matter is only the creeks are contaminated. You can stay in East Palestine as long as you don't let your kids play in the creek. We still need to know that. It's hard to make decisions about your life. I have 47 immediate family members that live within the 1 mile zone. Do we all sit down and talk about where we're going to move? How far is far enough? There's all these unanswered questions. So how do you make those decisions when we don't have answers?
I'm thinking there may be points in this crisis that give people who have differed over issues in the past some unequivocal common ground. So I asked Jamie if she thinks this crisis has the potential to actually bridge some community divides.
I think East Palestine has magnified a lot of issues that have already existed. And I do believe that this is not a blue issue. This is not a red issue. This is an issue with people. Just because it happened in East Palestine this time, we need to make sure this doesn't happen again in East Palestine or in your backyard. You know, this is an issue that deals with human lives, and it could affect anyone's constituents at any time.
I guess my question to you is, has this derailment driven more wedges into the community?
Politically, I don't think it has drawn more wedges. I would say that our town is very much Republican, very red down here, a lot of Trump supporters. You know, so there are some people, though, that are changing their minds about Trump once they figured out that he's the one that did a lot of the deregulation of the railroad. So you have them kind of shifting away from that strong Republican view. You have another group that it is bringing them closer to their Republican side. They're looking at this as Biden is ignoring us. He's still not been here after 6 months because we're red down here.
I mean, would you be willing to share your party affiliation, and did you vote for Trump?
You want me to honestly answer that?
Please.
I'm not Republican or Democrat. I'm issue-based. I'm not going to let my view on abortion dictate my view on gun control. So when I vote, I don't vote red or blue. I vote for the candidate that I feel like best supports my needs. I did vote for Trump. I'm not really proud to say that. I'm not a Trump supporter. At the time, I felt like it was the lesser of the two evils.
If you could name one thing, or I don't know, 3 things that could be done from anybody in government, state, local, county, or federal government, that would instill confidence in you and hopefully the rest of the community, what would that be? What would that look like?
Talk to your community members. Sit down and talk with us. See what's really going on the ground. Don't depend on other government agencies to tell you, go straight to the people. And to quit looking at this as a political issue. Again, you know, this is not political. These are human lives. We've been sitting here for 6 months now, stewing in these chemicals because of the red tape of the government.
Is part of the us and them in East Palestine one side who basically is hearing what the politicians and the EPA is saying, and they are concluding, we're getting good information here, and we're feeling satisfied, and we think that they're doing the best they can to make this better. And then there's the other side that feels like you represent, which is, no, I'm not believing this, and I don't think that you're giving me straight information. As a matter of fact, I feel like you're misleading me. Is that the difference?
That is the very truth of the matter right now. The us versus them are the believers in the government and the people that are getting all the money from Norfolk Southern. The other side are the people that have been symptomatic, that get sick, that know that something's not right and that our homes need to be tested. Part of it is the propaganda of the railroad. I feel like these people that are applauding Norfolk Southern and thanking them, the media is showing that. They're showing their kids playing in the bubbles at the festival. But who's speaking for those of us that are sick, that are still stuck in our homes, that are going to be forced back into these homes? And, what I keep hearing is, well, it doesn't matter. We should take the getting while the getting's good. Let's take this $25 million park. I morally cannot take a $25 million park when homes have not been tested and there are children's lives at risk, even if it's a 1 in a million chance. I can't take that with my child.
But again, you're not planning on returning, right?
I would love to return. I pray every day that someone tells me, you're crazy, it's safe to go home. That's where I spent my whole entire life. When I saw that mushroom cloud over my town, it broke me in a way that I didn't think it would. I want to go home. But I'm not going to go home if that means my daughter's life.
So Jamie's lost faith. in her government, in her mayor, in the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that came to investigate the derailment. She's lost faith in the Environmental Protection Agency that continues to work on the ground, cleaning up the contamination and communicating with the public. And she says she's unimpressed with a lot of what Norfolk Southern has done for East Palestine on the road to recovery, like pledging a $25 million park and sponsoring Easter egg hunts, fireworks, and a summer festival. She's frustrated and exhausted and says she never wanted to be the squeaky wheel.
Like, I'm so tired after 6 months of fighting and fighting and fighting for the health of our children. Like, why can't people see this isn't about anything but human lives? When did we get to a point in our country where money needs more than human lives? Whether it's the railroad with getting these tracks back up and running, whether it's the government saying Norfolk Southern should pay for this, we shouldn't. You sure filed a lawsuit awfully quick. Why don't you add these costs of taking care of your citizens, United States citizens? Why don't you send that bill to Norfolk Southern? Why are we still sitting here suffering? Why are our children still sick?
If you could visit yourself from a year ago, what advice would you give her?
Open your eyes. When you look at all the environmental degradation in our area, I guess my eyes were never open to that. You know, as far as the trains and the deregulations, you just don't think about that. You feel like your government's handling all that. You know, that's what our government's for, is to ensure our safety. So I would tell myself to open your eyes to what's around you. You know, open your eyes to all these potential carcinogens that are around you, to the vehicles traveling through your communities. This has just really opened my eyes to what we are doing to our environment in this area.
Going and protesting or something like that, was that something that you'd done before this?
Never. Like, I never in my life thought that I would do any of these things. This was not my plan. You know, my plan was to grow old in my quiet little town and watch my kid grow up. And, you know, now I think the realization that I'm going to be fighting this until I'm buried in the dirt, I don't get to enjoy the last years of my life. I'll be fighting this until the day I die.
After a break, we'll hear from some of the very government folks who Jamie's lost trust in. People who are charged with the cleanup for a community in the middle of a crisis.
You know, we're still here, and we're not going anywhere until it's done. And I think even if they don't say it, I think the community is reassured that, you know, there's somebody that has their back. We have their back. We're here. We're not leaving.
You're listening to Us and Them. This program is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council and the CRC Foundation.
In difficult times, music gives us peace, brings us together, and helps heal us. It calms our nerves and brightens our days. That's why we're bringing you classic episodes of Mountain Stage on air and in our podcast. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find something that's familiar or brand new and feel the power of live music on our website, mountainstage.org.
Hey, it's Trey, and this is Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. We're checking in on East Palestine, Ohio. Workers here continue to excavate contaminated materials. A train derailment and open burn sent toxic chemicals into the air and water. Since February, people from a number of government agencies have been on the scene to coordinate the response. They handle everything from cleanup to continuing community support. We just heard from Jamie Wallace, one displaced resident who's lost her faith in government during this crisis. While I was on the ground, I did meet more than one person still holding on to trust.
We have 3 levels of government: the local, the state, and then the federal.
McLean Hersman works in IT and says he lives within the official disaster area. He has history here. In fact, his house has been in the family for 3 generations. McLean says different levels of government have provided a range of responses.
So while the local level, I don't know necessarily that they were equipped to handle something of this. State level, I'm glad to see that Mike DeWine has finally asked the federal government to declare this the federal disaster area to ensure that we will get future help whenever Norfolk Southern decides that they've done whatever they've decided they've wanted to do. Federal government, yeah. I mean, Joe Biden, I'm happy with the way that he took it by the horns. I feel like on day 1, he said, if you need me, call me.
McLean says there's something else President Joe Biden could do.
I mean, I guess he could come here. That would probably show a lot of people.
Didn't he come here?
Trump did. Joe Biden did not. He said that he would, but Biden has not been here. No. Okay. I feel like that would show face for a lot. He went to Ukraine at the same exact time. But again, it's just for the PR standpoint of the people seeing him here. Again, on day 1 of it happening, he phoned DeWine and said, you need anything, you just got to pick up the phone and call me and say the word.
I spoke with on-site emergency response workers Mark Durno and Diane Russell from Region 5 of the EPA. Between them, Mark and Diane have nearly 40 years working in communities that experience contamination and pollution disasters, including the Flint water crisis. Their jobs make them some of the first on the scene, and their focus is to build trust with communities in crisis. How long did it take to have EPA establish a presence in East Palestine after the derailment?
About 4 hours. The interesting story behind that, Trey, one of our on-scene coordinators is outposted in Wheeling, West Virginia, which isn't too far from here. And he moonlights, jokingly, but he has another position as a hazmat responder for Beaver County, which is right over the border in Pennsylvania.
Right.
He got on scene as a hazmat tech, not as an EPA employee, and immediately called back to his regional phone duty officer and said, this is one of the biggest responses I've ever seen. Don't wait to get a call from the state. Get some on-scene coordinators out on the ground immediately, which we did.
What are some of the concerns you're hearing from East Palestine residents and folks in the adjacent areas?
So a lot of concerns that folks had brought up, especially early on in the response, were health concerns. What does this impact have on me and my family? And asking a lot of questions around what they should be doing to protect themselves. For a lot of folks, this is the first time they maybe had some introduction to some of these chemicals. So it's a learning curve going on. There's a lot of information that was coming in all at once from different sources. So it was overwhelming for folks. And so, we really tried to emphasize getting folks the channels, the right information where they needed. A lot of health questions, going to the local health clinics, getting plugged into their doctors. If they had environmental questions about how the response was going, being as responsive as possible as we could as this rolled out and information came in.
And how long do you think this cleanup will take?
So that's a tricky question because we're going to be done, I believe, with the major construction of this cleanup probably by mid to late September, maybe into October. It just depends on how complicated this last dig area that we have to clean up gets done. Then after that, we're going to go into a long-term full characterization plan, meaning we're going to be collecting surface samples and subsurface samples from areas on site and adjacent to the site to see if any contamination was missed. It's going to be a pretty comprehensive assessment. That could take another several months. But the main construction, I anticipate to be done early fall.
And is it the EPA that makes the determination as to whether or not it's safe for residents to go back to their homes or their places of business?
Yeah, that's a function of Unified Command as a whole, collaboration of several agencies who all have a functional operational responsibility to manage the cleanup. In this case, it's a combination of US EPA, Ohio EPA, Columbiana County Emergency Management Agency, the Village of East Palestine, headed by the fire chief, and we've also elected to include Norfolk Southern as part of the Unified Command Team because they are doing the bulk of the operations on the job site under our oversight.
Okay.
But we also have 20 what we call assisting and cooperating agencies, everywhere from county and state agencies to supporting federal agencies to our public health partners who help us make determinations on whether or not the levels of contamination are safe for residential occupancy or not. And to date, since the evacuation was lifted, we have not seen any sustained levels of hazardous substances or particulate matter in the community, with some rare exceptions that would indicate we have a threat to public health. That rare exception was when wildfires moved into town.
The wildfires that are coming down from Canada.
The wildfires that were coming down from Canada. They were setting off our particulate monitors on site to a level that would be considered of concern. So it was an indication that both our particulate monitors were working just fine in the community, and also the advisories that we're getting regarding the Canadian wildfires were accurate. There were fine particulates in the air that were hazardous.
Which East Palestine areas and other adjacent areas are there concerns for adverse environmental impact caused by the derailment?
Well, currently, the only areas that we're concerned about are the areas immediately adjacent to the derailment site, mainly because we're still doing excavation of contaminated materials, and we have a pretty wide-ranging air monitoring and air sampling system to ensure that hazardous levels of vapors are not leaving the site and impacting those community members. However, early in the response, all the locations that were downwind of the vent and burn operation that occurred, even though
That's the controlled burn?
Yes, the controlled burn or the vent and burn. It's known by both terms. And those communities, we collected soil samples over a 1 mile by 2 mile area, plus some additional samples based on some modeling that was done to ensure that there weren't adverse impacts to soils in those areas. We are actually just about ready to release a report on our phase 1 soil sampling program. And all the statistics are indicating that there were no noticeable impacts to soils. We know there were impacts from the smoke and the fire. That was obvious. We saw it. The particles got on the ground. The question was, did they negatively impact soil in the greater community? And again, our data is showing that they did not. So that's good. That's good for the farming community, which is huge out here. It's good for the recreational properties and the residential properties. We've advised the communities that it's okay to use your land for whatever you were using it for. It's okay to garden, okay to plant crops. The soils look good.
Are there lasting environmental concerns related to the explosion and the controlled burn?
Right, yeah, controlled burn or vent and burn, yeah. Not immediately. I'm sure that there's going to be some research done. There are a number of academic institutions, a number of other organizations out here doing work, and there's going to be some long-term research on whether or not the vinyl chloride burn had any lasting impacts. But again, our initial first phase of sampling was done to specifically determine whether or not there were direct impacts to those properties. And again, research might show us that there were some potential impacts that may be discovered, but from the work that we've done, we're not seeing anything noticeable.
So, from day one, the EPA has been on the ground in East Palestine. Mark and Diane are encouraging. They say things are going well. I'm trying to reconcile the fear and concern I've been hearing from residents with what I'm hearing from the EPA.
I feel like at the base of this is really the sense of public trust. Several residents have told me that they don't feel like they're receiving information that instills confidence. So what efforts are you taking to address this diminishment in trust?
One of the keys for us, Trey, is to be present all the time, stay on message, and our message is, compliant with our data, meaning, our data is telling us the story of, what's impacted, what work still needs to be done, and what work we need to plan to get done. Great example of this, Sulphur Run, the main stream that runs through town. It's still contaminated. We've been very clear with the community that we acknowledge that stream is heavily contaminated and that we need to do a full characterization assessment of that stream. The community has expressed frustration to us that it hasn't happened fast enough. We share that frustration, but we have to make sure that the work that we're doing is done correctly. And we have a lot of stakeholders, our state partners, some non-government partners that need to input on our plans to make sure that we're characterizing this stream correctly. But the key there was to acknowledge the community's frustration. And even if they don't like the answer, explain to them why we're making the decisions we're doing. Explain to them why some of our activities are taking longer than we'd like. Explain to them why there are certain questions that we can't answer yet. And the most important thing is to be present. Most of the media is gone. Most of the other agencies that aren't affiliated with Unified Command are no longer working on the ground. We're still here, and we're not going anywhere until it's done. And I think even if they don't say it, I think the community is reassured that, there's somebody that has their back. We have their back. We're here. We're not leaving.
So you mentioned Sulphur Run, and I spoke with residents who live along that creek, and they've had to relocate, some temporarily. Some say they've had to permanently relocate. And this is because of potential exposure to toxic chemicals. There's so much unknown about this. And how is it that you approach, again, instilling confidence into these people, letting them know what they need to know?
Based on that scenario you just described, one of the first actions we took was in early March when EPA established its unilateral order to direct Norfolk Southern's operations. We asked the company to establish a temporary relocation program for those other residents who are in the immediate vicinity of the derailment site that may not be comfortable, staying in town while the bulk of the excavation work is going on. We know that some vapors and some odors may be generated. We know some dusts from our support zones may be generated, and that can make people very uncomfortable. The company agreed with that request. We did not order them to do it. They volunteered to, allow some residents to voluntarily relocate. So that was the first example of EPA, looking at the community's best interests. We knew that there weren't hazardous levels of chemicals leaving the site and getting into the neighborhoods, but we set up a extremely advanced air monitoring and air sampling network to demonstrate that. It's been there from day one, and it's not going away until we're done with the derailment site. And we remind the community of that on a routine basis.
But can you tell me, how do you focus your field work to encourage honest exchanges with the residents?
So we can put out information, but if that information isn't meeting communities' needs, then it really doesn't go anywhere and people aren't getting what they need. Because as soon as we understand what communities' questions are and what their information needs are, then we can start meeting those. One thing that we often do is we try to identify stakeholders early on and find those trusted sources of information, community leaders, pastors.
But when you say stakeholders, you mean people in the community who could possibly help you convey the message that you need to convey, so that they could possibly dispel disinformation?
That, and then also just willing participants to have a conversation with us and wanting access to information and a point person, and interested also in having that dialogue frequently. They're thinking about themselves and their broader community, bringing us questions that they maybe have heard in other forums to help us clear this stuff up. So it's not just a means to an end for us, but it's really how can we serve community members that are already serving.
I've talked to people about public meetings and gatherings, and sometimes they get tense. And I'm just curious, how do you try to help people continue to ask questions and listen to the information that you feel that you need to share with them?
Well, we continue to have that forum. And what we find is, if you have one big public meeting and then that's it, people have a tendency to kind of have it build up and then let it all out at once. We've been really deliberate about having small, frequent meetings, topic specific. We also record it so people, if they can't make it, they can access it online and get the information later. But we also come to community events, make ourselves available. Welcome Center is also another example of that. The doors are open. Come and ask us at your convenience. Phone lines. So multiple avenues for communication that allow folks to ask us and making sure that we're deliberate about making sure that those remain open.
I want to reemphasize something Diane said. She spearheaded along with the Columbiana County Emergency Management Agency, the effort to get our community partners group going. And through that platform, we initiated the public information sessions. That was a request from the community. We initiated a newsletter that gets mailed to every East Palestine resident. And through that process, what we've learned is the majority of the community, feels very comfortable with what the federal government's efforts and response has been to this train derailment. And we recognize that there are a number of people that aren't comfortable, but in talking with a few of our key stakeholders, I was just having a conversation with a city council person who also owns a business here who deals with the public all the time. I asked them, I said, from a trust and comfort standpoint, how's the community doing? And the response was about 80% of the community feels really good about where the response to this incident has gone, how well this cleanup's going. But another 20% are still skeptical. So, we feel pretty good that the efforts we're taking are making a difference because we're hearing it directly from not only community members, but community leaders. And we recognize we can't please everybody, but we're going to try and gain the trust of that last 20% as much as we can.
This might seem snarky, but the day that I was in East Palestine, I was just walking around the street with my microphone, and it just seemed like that, generally speaking, the people that I was connecting with, they seemed very kind of down in the mouth about this whole thing. And the thing that I kept hearing over and over again is we just don't feel like we're getting the straight information that we need. That's the type of story that I'm hearing.
I am not surprised. This has been such a tremendous impact to community in a number of negative ways. People's lives have been upended. It is not surprising to me that folks are still reeling from that. And it's also not surprising to me that they are trying to figure out who to trust. There's so much misinformation out there. We're not always the first source of people's information, right? Who do they trust? Friends, families, pastors, people close to them. And, where are they getting their information, right? So it is not a surprise that people have been turned around by this whole thing. How can we help? What resources can we bring to the table to manage this a little bit more? But it's not going to necessarily always be us that's going to be able to bring folks and change that experience for them, because it goes deep.
It goes deep, partly because the aftermath of a disaster breeds fear. And that sends us searching for something to hold on to. Something or someone to trust. For people in East Palestine, the erosion in public trust makes the response to the derailment its own problem.
I'm just curious, does the diminishment of trust make it difficult for the EPA to work towards solutions in East Palestine?
We do recognize that we have a huge trust gap because of our different means of communications now. I follow all the social media pages in this town. I do. Like Diane said, I see the enormous amount of misinformation that's put out by neighbors and friends, and you can just feel the echo chamber building in these pages. But then when you have a one-on-one conversation with somebody and you sit down with them and you show them the data and you show them why we're making the decisions that we're making, the light bulb goes on. And all of a sudden, the next day, we're getting a batch of cookies, and that resident's thanking us for what we did for them. So the problem is we can't have those one-on-one conversations with all 4,500 people that live here, but we've made a significant dent. But at the end of the day, Trey, there are some who have a certain set of beliefs in their head about what's going on either at their home or in their community. And there's not a whole lot we can do to change that, but we'll continue to be present. We'll continue to answer their questions, and we'll continue to address them respectfully, because that's really the best we can do.
Much of what you deal with is the science of an accident. How substances and chemicals affect people and their environment. What kind of change have you seen in what people will accept about facts that have to do with scientific knowledge?
Science is an objective field, and there's uncertainty in it, no matter where you go. And I think one of the things that ends up getting convoluted is the fact that there's pieces of that uncertainty in science that is becoming politicized or becoming leveraged for an agenda. And I think that becomes problematic, because as objective scientists practicing objective science, we're presenting all the pieces, but then someone might raise a nugget of information and then, aha, there's something sinister going on here. When really, we are able to make decisions even though uncertainty in science exists. It's just the nature of that field. We really make our decisions based on data and science and multiple lines of evidence, which is really important concept that I think sometimes gets missed.
One of the things that I've heard in East Palestine is that one of the residents defines the us and them divide amongst the residents is those who trust what they're hearing from the EPA and those who do not.
Yeah, and that's
how does that feel?
That's evident, and it never feels good not to be trusted, especially when, we're straight up people. What you see is what you get with people like Diane and me, and it's hard when we know that people don't necessarily trust the information that we're giving them. And there is some degree of fracturing. I think that's normal in disasters. Trey, my experience, having done a lot of this work, working big FEMA disasters as well, is that it takes about 2 years for the community to really become whole again. It's an observation of mine. There's no studies behind it. It's just what I've seen over the years.
When I come to East Palestine, like one of the things that I notice is like right at the corner of North Market Street and I guess it's at Main Street, is that your office sits right next to the Republican Committee of East Palestine. And right away I kind of thought, here is the office for the EPA next to an office of something that is political and that often makes these issues into a political issue. As you work with the people in this community, are you aware that there is that political dynamic and that what it is that you do is something that is seen as political?
Like you said, Trey, we've worked with both sides of the house, some more on the moderate side, some more on the extreme side. And the one thing that's rung true through all of that is the program work on the ground never changes. What we see in the political spectrum is arguments about money and policy. But again, on the ground, when an emergency needs to be managed, it gets managed. And, typically, no matter who's sitting at the highest ranks of our government, we get support. This incident has been no different. We've had the full support of the United States government, and I've worked on many responses through many administrations, and it's always been the same.
I understand that this work has been politicized and there's a perception out there, but the reality of how we do our work is rooted in service for the citizens who we work for.
In this case, East Palestine.
East Palestine, in this case, absolutely. This Communities Welcome Center is open to all walks of life. Come in, get your questions answered. We're going to treat you no differently than anyone else. And for folks who want to come in and, say thank you, we're here. For those who have issues and have concerns or questions, we're here. It doesn't matter. We're going to serve the people who need to be served in this community.
Do you feel like there's an us and them divide between the locals and the people with the EPA who are trying to help?
I mean, I get there's that narrative out there, but I think, and this plays out in all the communities that I work in, it's about that relationship individual to individual. How can I show up and support you? So a lot of times we break down those barriers because people have certain expectations, like government is here and they're going to be imposing. At the end of the day, government service is public service.
Right.
And what does public service look like? And I hope that every interaction that I have with folks that I give a little bit of nuance and a direct experience to change that misconception that government is somehow here to take something. Our approach is to not break communities, like this whole idea of, permanent relocation. We understand that has long-term impacts to community and culture of a place. Can we take care of the issue at hand, protect human health and the environment, and also protect and hold sacred the community and the culture that exists so that it can maintain into the future and that bond that they have?
I have to admit, stepping into their world for just a minute, the world of a small town surviving an ongoing crisis with unknown implications for an unknown period of time, I'm torn. Community meetings, websites and flyers, people to contact, and an assistance center. What else could the EPA do to build trust with someone like Jamie Wallace? I remember how she said she didn't expect much from the railroad, but that the government folks, those are her people. They're supposed to have her back. But like the EPA's Mark Durno mentioned, some people are just going to believe what they want to. So how do you restore trust? I just don't know. But there is one thing that's happening. In the wake of a disaster, sometimes people find common ground. East Palestine resident Timothea Dieter says there are moments when people come together.
East Palestine is quite a conservative area. But what I saw whenever things happened was I saw people who were on the right, who were on the left, who were somewhere in the middle, and some people who didn't care at all come together to demand answers and demand justice. Personally, I was proud of that, and that's part of the reason why I'm here. That beauty in coming together, that solidarity, is what everyone should have all the time.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Timothea. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode was me, Trey Kay, Tasha A.F. Lemley, Matthew Hancock, and Kate Smith. Other voices in this episode were Trent Solomon, Dan Peebles, Candy Keel, John Grimm, and Shannon Badger. And additional thanks to Ben Washburn and Tim Griffith. Michael Lipton, Tristram Lozow, and Ahmed Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the West Virginia Humanities Council, and the CRC Foundation. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Share them with us on our Facebook page or X, formerly known as Twitter, at Us Them Podcast. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.